Over my 32 years as a cardiologist, I have sat across from thousands of seniors in my clinic. I have reviewed countless blood pressure logs and echocardiograms. I have held hands in quiet hospital corridors after strokes that should have been completely prevented. Through it all, the exact same mistake keeps showing up over and over again. It isn't a mistake with diet, and it isn't a mistake with medication. It is a reading mistake. It stems from a belief planted in people's minds decades ago, one that the medical system has never truly corrected. And it is quietly putting seniors on a dangerous path towards stroke, heart failure, and permanent organ damage right now. That belief is this: the idea that the bottom number is the only dangerous one. If you are over 60 and tracking your blood pressure at home, there is a very real possibility that this exact belief is the most dangerous thing in your house. In more than 3 decades of practice, the patients I worry about the most are actually not the ones with wildly alarming off-the-charts readings. They are the individuals who look at a reading like 164/72 and feel perfectly calm. They are the ones who see 158/76 and think to themselves, well, at least the bottom number looks fine. Those are the exact patients who end up walking into my office years too late. My name is Dr. Jonathan Reed, and I am a cardiologist with 32 years of clinical experience. I have dedicated my entire career to one specific area of medicine, the human heart. Not general health trends, not broad wellness advice, but the heart itself. What I am about to share with you is something I wish every single senior could hear directly from their own doctor, but unfortunately, most never will. Today, I am going to answer a question that faces millions. Which blood pressure number is more dangerous after 60? A cardiologist answers. I will explain why everything you were previously taught about this topic is completely outdated, and I will pull back the curtain on the 3 distinct patterns I see in my practice that most physicians never clearly explain. Please stay with me, because by the time this video ends, you will never look at your home blood pressure monitor the same way again. Let me tell you about a patient named Margaret. She was 69 years old when she first walked into my office. As a retired school teacher, she was incredibly meticulous. She was the kind of person who kept a detailed, written log of her blood pressure readings stretching back 18 months. It was a small green notebook, with entries neatly written in blue ink every single morning before breakfast. When I opened that notebook, I saw the exact same pattern repeating month after month. 162/74, 158/72, and 166/70. Out in the margins, she had jotted down little notes to herself. Bottom number, always fine. Doctor says to watch it. Feeling okay? What Margaret did not know, because nobody had ever explained it to her clearly, was that a normal bottom number was doing absolutely nothing to protect her. In reality, that elevated top number was quietly damaging every major organ in her body, beat by beat, day after day, for a year and a half. Just 3 weeks after our very first appointment, Margaret called my office from an emergency room. She had been folding laundry at home when her left arm suddenly went weak. Her speech became thick and slurred for about 45 seconds, and then everything seemingly returned to normal. She almost didn't even call for help. She later told me, "I thought it passed, so I figured it was nothing." What she had actually experienced was a transient ischemic attack, a mini stroke or a warning stroke, and her blood pressure log had been telling the absolute truth the entire time. She had simply been focusing on the wrong number. If you have ever looked at your own monitor and reassured yourself that the bottom number looks fine, I urge you to keep watching, because what we are going to cover next changes everything. Before we move on, tell me down in the comments right now, which number have you been paying the most attention to on your monitor, the top or the bottom? I read every single comment on this channel. For decades, the medical community focused heavily on the diastolic pressure, the bottom number, as the main signal of danger. Generations of patients grew up being taught that the bottom number was the one to fear. For younger adults, that medical approach wasn't entirely wrong. However, the physiology of aging completely changes the rules, and mainstream medicine has been painfully slow to communicate this shift to the very patients who are affected by it most. If you are over 60 and your doctor is still spending more time discussing your diastolic pressure rather than your systolic, You are simply not getting the full picture. Our clinical understanding shifted profoundly over the last 2 decades. While the official guidelines eventually caught up, the everyday conversation inside the examination room never truly did. I watched that exact communication gap cost Margaret a warning stroke, and I have watched it cost other patients far more. Let me show you exactly why this happens. Think about a brand new garden hose. It is highly flexible and forgiving. When the water pressure rises, the walls of the hose expand slightly to absorb the force. Now, imagine leaving that exact same hose outside in the elements for 10 years, exposed to the sun, heat, and time. It inevitably becomes stiff, rigid, and brittle. When the pressure rises inside it now, the walls can no longer expand, and that raw force travels straight through, completely uncushioned. Your arteries do the exact same thing as the years go by. The elastic arterial walls that safely soften the impact of every single heartbeat when you were 40 are gradually stiffening by the time you reach 65, 70, or 75. Now, when your heart pumps, the resulting pressure wave hits much harder, driving the top number, the systolic pressure, significantly higher. Meanwhile, the bottom number may remain completely flat or even begin drifting lower. This is not a system malfunction, it is the natural consequence of arterial aging. The specific pattern it creates, a climbing top number alongside a normal or low bottom number, is so incredibly common in seniors that it has its own clinical name: isolated systolic hypertension. It is the single most common form of high blood pressure in older adults, yet it remains the most consistently dismissed. In my cardiology practice, a top number that sits persistently above 140, even if the bottom number is perfectly acceptable, is something I address during the very first visit, every single time, because I know exactly what happens when that pressure is left to climb. Margaret's little green notebook had been showing readings of 162, 166, and 164 for 18 long months. Her arteries had been enduring that relentless strain every single minute of every single day. Her handwritten margin note that read, "Feeling okay," was telling the most dangerous kind of truth. The kind of comfort that mistakenly gives you permission to just wait. Now, here's what I need you to deeply understand before we go any further. What I have just shared with you is the most critical long-term truth about blood pressure after age 60. But it is still not the complete truth. If I stopped talking right here, I would be leaving you with a picture that is still dangerously incomplete. There is a second major pattern that does not unfold slowly over months, one that can actually become life-threatening within a single hour. And there is a third pattern, the most deceptive of them all, that hides right behind numbers that look almost beautiful. Stay with me as we discuss this emergency scenario and the hidden trap of overmedication. If you are watching this right now and realizing that you might have been misreading your own numbers, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. I spent 32 years sharing the honest truth with patients inside a consulting room, and now I am dedicated to bringing that exact truth directly to you here. Let me introduce you to Raymond. Raymond was 73 years old, a former engineer, and the exact kind of man who trusted hard data and didn't rattle easily. One morning, he woke up with a deep headache situated right behind both eyes. It wasn't his usual type of headache, it was something entirely different that he couldn't quite put a name to. He sat down at his kitchen table, wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm, and the monitor read 192 over 116. He waited 5 quiet minutes and checked it a second time. 188 over 119. Moments later, the vision in his right eye blurred. Despite this, Raymond almost talked himself out of calling for help. He later told me, "I kept thinking it would come back down. It always does." Fortunately, an underlying instinct made him pick up the phone, and that gut feeling may have saved his life. What Raymond was experiencing is known as a hypertensive emergency. This is defined as a reading that climbs above 180 systolic or above 120 diastolic, especially when accompanied by physical symptoms. These symptoms include chest pain, shortness of breath, sudden weakness or numbness, trouble speaking, vision changes, a severe headache, or confusion. Experiencing any of these symptoms alongside a reading in that extreme range is absolutely not a wait-and-see situation. That is the exact moment you need to call for emergency medical help immediately. I'm telling you this directly because I have seen firsthand what happens when patients delay seeking care at that critical threshold. The outcomes can be catastrophic and completely permanent. Now, I need to share something with you that almost no other blood pressure video on this platform ever mentions. Something I have committed to saying publicly because seniors truly deserve to hear it. The aggressive clinical push to drive blood pressure numbers down is fundamentally correct in principle. However, in older patients, it has inadvertently created a second quiet crisis that simply isn't being discussed loudly enough. This is exactly what happened to a patient of mine named Walter. Walter was 78 years old, retired, and incredibly diligent. He took every single one of his medications exactly as prescribed, and on paper, his numbers looked absolutely excellent. 124/54, 122/56, and 126/52. His previous cardiologist had actually sent him home with a supportive thumbs up. Yet Walter felt like he was slowly disappearing. He became profoundly dizzy the moment he stood up from the sofa. Every single morning, he had to tightly grip the bathroom wall just to stay steady in the shower. He had even started walking with one hand trailing continuously along the hallway furniture. Not because of any weakness in his legs, but because the floor beneath him felt completely unreliable. His family simply assumed it was a natural part of getting older. When Walter first sat across from me in my clinic, I looked straight past his top numbers and focused directly on his bottom numbers, 54, 56, and 52. You see, the coronary arteries, the vital blood vessels that feed the heart muscle itself, receive the vast majority of their blood supply during diastole. This is the brief pause between heartbeats when the heart relaxes and rests. If that diastolic pressure drops too low, the heart muscle itself may not receive the vital blood and oxygen it needs between each beat. In a 78-year-old body with arteries that have already naturally narrowed and stiffened with age, that is not a minor issue. A diastolic number that sits consistently below 60 for a senior taking blood pressure medication, especially when paired with symptoms like Walter's, is absolutely not a medical victory. It is a serious warning wearing a trophy. Over the course of 6 weeks, I carefully adjusted his medications. His dizziness completely resolved, and his need to grip the hallway furniture entirely disappeared. At his next follow-up visit, he looked at me and said, "Doctor, I forgot what it felt like to just walk across a room normally." The ultimate goal of managing your blood pressure is never to win a numbers contest. The true goal is to protect your heart, safeguard your brain, and preserve your daily safety and independence. Lower is not always better. Safer is always better. And in seniors over the age of 60, those two things are not always the same. This brings us to the third and final pattern, which involves a wide pulse pressure. I want you to pay exceptionally close attention here, because this is the exact pattern that fools even the most careful health-conscious seniors. Let me tell you about Evelyn. Evelyn was 82 years old, still driving herself to her Tuesday book club every week, and still cooking completely from scratch every single Sunday for her son's family. She came to see me not because she felt dramatically ill, but because something had been quietly stealing her vitality for months. She had started leaving her book club early because her legs felt heavy on the walk back to her car. She had stopped taking the stairs at her son's house, telling herself she was just being sensible. Eventually, she gave up her beloved evening walks entirely without ever making a conscious decision to stop. Her life had quietly contracted around her, and she had barely even noticed it happening. When I reviewed her home blood pressure log, the numbers initially seemed almost reassuring. 168/58, 172/60, and 166/56. Her son looked over at those readings and said, "Well, that bottom number looks great, right?" I gently turned the logbook around to face him and said, "Don't look at the individual numbers themselves. Look at the massive gap between them." It was a gap of over 110 points. A healthy pulse pressure, which is simply the mathematical difference between your top and bottom reading, typically sits around 40 points when you are at rest. When that gap pushes past 60, past 70, or even past 100 points, that widening distance is your arterial wall telling you something absolutely critical. It means the arteries have lost their elasticity so completely that when the heart pumps, there is absolutely nothing left to cushion the force going out, and nothing to absorb it coming back. As a result, the systolic pressure climbs, the diastolic pressure drifts lower, and the growing gap between them becomes a map of the damage accumulating inside. Evelyn hadn't been slowing down simply because she was 82. She was slowing down because her entire cardiovascular system was under sustained, unaddressed strain. The specific number she had been monitoring, that bottom number that looked so beautiful on paper, had actually been pointing her in exactly the wrong direction. Now let me close by saying something I have wanted to express clearly for a very long time. The standard medical treatment threshold of 140/90 is not a universal absolute truth. It is merely a starting framework. Applying that baseline rule rigidly without taking into account a patient's arterial stiffness, their history of falls, their specific diastolic behavior, and their individual physical tolerance isn't precision medicine. It is guesswork wearing a white coat. The most current advanced cardiology thinking has moved decisively toward individualized targets for older adults, precisely because clinical evidence shows that chasing a one-size-fits-all number in a 75 or 78-year-old body can create just as much harm as it prevents. Unfortunately, that modern approach rarely makes its way out of medical journals and into everyday conversations with patients. Based on more than 3 decades of practice, here are the 3 core truths I want you to carry with you. First, the top number is almost always the strongest long-term warning signal after you turn 60. A systolic reading that stays persistently above 140 deserves serious medical attention, completely regardless of what your bottom number looks like. Never let a calm bottom number silence a steadily climbing top number. Second, any reading that climbs above 180/120 accompanied by any physical symptom is a potential medical emergency. Do not wait. Do not try to rationalize it away, and seek emergency help immediately. Third, a bottom number that falls below 60 for a senior who is taking blood pressure medication, especially if you are experiencing dizziness or unsteadiness, is an important warning in the exact opposite direction. Furthermore, a widening gap between your 2 numbers is a direct signal from your arteries. Do not ignore it just because the individual numbers appear acceptable on the surface. Your blood pressure monitor isn't just handing you 2 random numbers. It is presenting you with a complete clinical picture. It is revealing a distinct pattern that tells you whether your arteries are stiffening, whether your heart is under strain, whether your current medical treatment is properly balanced, and ultimately, whether your body is moving closer to a health crisis or safely away from one. Margaret's green notebook was filled to the brim with the right information, but she was simply reading the wrong column. Walter's numbers looked like an absolute medical success, yet his body was sending an entirely different message. Evelyn's bottom number looked absolutely beautiful, but the wide gap between her numbers was where the true story lived. The seniors who stay the safest are never the ones who simply track the highest volume of readings. They are the individuals who truly understand what the underlying pattern means, and who bring that complete, comprehensive picture directly to their physician. They share not just a single number from this morning, but the long-term trend, any accompanying physical symptoms, and the deep story those 2 numbers are telling when looked at together. If this video has changed how you view your own monitor, please share it with at least one person over the age of 60 who still mistakenly believes a good bottom number means they are fully protected. That outdated belief resides in millions of homes right now, and in far too many of them, it remains the most dangerous thing sitting on the kitchen counter. I am Dr. Jonathan Reed, with 32 years of experience in cardiology, and I have spent every single day of it trying to give people the honest truth their bodies truly deserve. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.